Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this morning and afternoon. My name is Douglas Brown, CEO at haloconsulting, a certified minority-owned search firm based in Chicago that provides a variety of custom, scalable, talent-driven solutions for organizations in growth mode. Halo hosts virtual roundtable events like this one for HR and technology leaders on a variety of topics, and we hope you'll be interested in attending our future events. This event is being recorded, and feel free to drop any questions into the QA function in the toolbar, and we will address those questions at the end of the event. We will be sharing a survey to gather your feedback, and we will have a recorded version of this event available on YouTube. For now, I would like to introduce our speakers. So first, I'd like to introduce John Harper. John currently serves in the Office of the President at South Central College as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and as the Interim Director of Admissions. He holds a degree in political science and Masters of Educational Leadership and Administration from Minnesota State University, Mankato. John has experience in recruitment, inclusion development, and is passionate about access and equity within higher education. At South Central, John actively works with his academic deans, faculty, and staff to examine policy, procedure, and assessments with an equity lens. He is the youngest member to ever sit on the president's cabinet at the college. He recently was accepted into Morgan State University and will begin his doctorate program this summer. The next panelist I'd like to introduce is Yolanda Dennis. Yolanda is the Chief Diversity Officer at Massachusetts Community College. She holds the positions of Title IX Coordinator, Affirmative Action Officer, and ADA Coordinator, ensuring compliance and conducting investigations that address and remedy instances of prohibited conduct such as discrimination, sexual misconduct, and harassment. With over 30 years in higher education, she has an extensive experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion, conflict resolution, and public policy. Yolanda holds a master's degree in public policy from UMass Dartmouth and is certified as a Title IX investigator, post-secondary, and K-12. She advocates for having difficult conversations about challenging subjects, including race relations, implicit bias, equity, and injustice. She has served on the board of the YWCA of Southeastern Massachusetts and our sisters school, both located in New Bedford. In October of 2020, she was appointed to the board of directors of Livestream, Inc. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Justin Mallet. Dr. Justin is the Assistant Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Northwest Missouri State University. He has been in this role for 18 months after serving as the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Northwest for 2.5 years. Dr. Mallet previously was the Director of the American Intercultural Center at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay and was the Director of the Office of Multicultural Affairs at Illinois College. Prior to working in diversity and inclusion, Dr. Mallet worked in admissions and was a coordinator for new student orientation. Dr. Mallet has 15 years of experience working in higher education, and 10 years of it has been working in diversity and inclusion. The last panelist I'd like to introduce is Aaron J. Griffen, Ph.D. Dr. Aaron is a P12 practitioner scholar with over 21 years of experience in public and charter as a middle school English teacher, an assistant principal, and as a high school principal, and currently serves as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at DSST Public Schools in Denver, Colorado. Dr. Griffen is an author, speaker, consultant, and panelist with an active research interest and publishing agenda in diversity, equity, and inclusion, P12 practitioner scholarship, cultural responsiveness and relevance, culturally responsive instructional leadership, multicultural curriculum and instruction, African American educational lobbying, and urban policy and analysis. He and his wife, Karen, are the co-founders of Prosperity Educators, LLC, an independent educational consulting company whose services include diversity, equity, and inclusion development, instructional leadership and peer coaching, strategic planning, and organizational management. Dr. Griffen's book, Challenging to Integrate Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Programs in Organizations, was released in October of 2020. Let's go ahead and dive in with the first question. All right, so The first question I'd like to start off with, what are your educational institutions doing within the next year to promote diversity, equity, inclusion? Yolanda, I'll pass you the mic to kick it off.
Sure. So for this coming year, well, this past year, we really was intentional as far as having a year of social justice because of what's just been going on, not only just nationally, presently, but we said, what's been happening for a while. So we really was intentional again to do some different initiatives. So moving for this year, we're taking away the year of social justice to social justice, right? Because social justice, we should be fighting for that every year. So some of the things that I'm doing is just having those intentional conversations with our deans and different divisions to talk about how we could look at our curriculum, also our syllabi, how we could be more inclusive with our syllabi. Also looking at, we're being really intentional about looking at data also, right? As you can see, I'm saying intentional because we have to be purposeful when we talk about DEI. So really looking through a lens of being equity minded and just knowing that not all students learn at the same way. That it's important that when you look at data, you can't just say students of color. You have to really break it down to Black students, Hispanic students, American Indian students. So we're really looking at that to see how they do in different classes. So again, just really being data driven this year. Also, we're focusing on, we just launched our LGBTQIA survey for our faculty, staff, and students. And hopefully we'll get our data collection over the summer and really start doing some more better like programming and also just to see how we could be more inclusive for that population for our faculty and staff. So those are some of the things that we're doing. It's a lot. We have to be patient. We can't have this work does not happen overnight. And also just, again, just focusing on having difficult conversation and not being one and done. That's been important too. I find that, one of the mistakes that I've made is that, you have a training or you have a workshop and people are all fired up to keep talking about it, but we don't, keep talking about it. So we're really going to hammer down and just continue, always have the conversation. So when folks see me in meetings, I'm always bringing up DEI.
Great, thanks, Yolanda. And it sounds like you and the executive team at Mazawit Community College are involved with some really cool initiatives right now. John, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, sure. So definitely being data driven. The state of Minnesota has something called Equity 2030, where the state colleges and universities basically have some benchmarks that all of us need to reach, right, in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and of course, closing the achievement gap. So one thing that my college, South Central College here in Southern Minnesota, has done has created an Equity by Design task force to embed cultural competencies in the curriculum. Some of the other things that we're beginning to look at are how are our students of color, our BIPOC students doing in developmental education courses, specifically math, because that seems to be a gateway. We've identified a couple of different courses that we're really getting ready to dive into. We're looking at policies, processes, procedures, getting ready to launch a lot of different workshops that we feel are going to be very beneficial to the college, especially for our faculty, and creating their equity lenses. We launched this past academic year our first ever anti-racism training series, right? And we got some really good positive feedback that we're excited about and getting ready to expand that in the fall. Another thing that we've done as it relates to higher education is that myself and my office, we've partnered really extensively with the HR department, helping them develop their own equity lenses, and then seeing what are our recruiting strategies, right? Like, what does recruiting faculty of color look like? What type of additional supports and professional development do they need? Are we just pushing things in the one sector, right? We're looking at not only how we post our jobs, but the language that we are having in these job descriptions to not just make them more attractive and appealing, but to let individuals know that this is a place where they can come, grow, and be a part of some really cool dynamic things.
Great, thanks, John. Dr. Aaron, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, thank you. I love the theme I'm hearing already is from both Yolanda and John is that, yeah, we're doubling down on our data. A lot of the data per Yolanda's point has been, students of color, people of color versus white. One of the things that we have worked through this year intentionally is that taking that student of color and people of color data and breaking it down by specific demographics, not only racially and ethnically, but also by LGBTQIA, by programs, second language learners, special education, free and reduced lunch, economic status, just breaking it all the way down so we can understand not only our staff experience, but also our student experience, because one of our focuses is retention. We want to make sure that if we're recruiting a diverse staff across sexualities and race and ethnicities and experiences, we got to make sure we retain them. And that's one of the areas where we've struggled a bit over the last few years. It's gone up and down. It's never been consistently up. So we're making sure that we're working to retain. And one of the things we've done with our priorities this year as a network in the SST is now we are taking our DEI, and we did it a little bit this year, but we're really focusing on embedding the DEI initiatives across every single priority and across every single program. And the way we're doing that is making sure that every single priority has the language embedded inside the priority. And every single priority has an action plan for how diversity, equity, and inclusion will be developed with those specific individuals owning that priority and with the people who are being impacted by priority. And some of that includes some of our student development that we're going to focus on, not only providing safe spaces for students to unpack the given moments in our community and in our nation, but also giving them the skills to be able to articulate the mental health needs they have, the wellness needs they have, the trauma they're feeling, and the racial and sexuality traumas that they may be feeling as well. And then also expanding that into family and community engagement. Because one of the mistakes we make in P12 is that we say we want family and community engagement and we say we want participation, but it's always a one way. It's us reaching out to families, but not opening the door for families to reach back and give us feedback. So we've been implementing student surveys and family surveys around some of our equity initiatives and around our communication in order for us to identify how we need to meet their needs. Because the last 3 to 7 years, all of our development has been leader facing and adult facing. And that's been very intentional. And the reason for that, because I've gotten a lot of pushback on that. And I've had to explain to folks that if we go back to Brown v. Board of Education, the mistake we made in Brown was that we took Black children and put them in white schools. We should have took white adults and put them in Black schools. We should have moved the adults. We moved the children first. So one of the things we focused on was developing the adults, developing leaders, developing our board, because when we start to develop children and they start to ask questions and start to question, the adults have to be prepared to have those conversations. So if anyone's doing it backwards and you're starting with children, this is why you've had so much influx and you have adults not knowing what to do, because children were put into a situation that children are not prepared to have those conversations with adults. So that's why we did it that way. And then lastly, all of this is driving towards, in our Denver public schools in 2019, DSST is a charter organization that's under Denver Public Schools. We work within Denver Public Schools in Denver. They started the Black Excellence Resolution. So one of the things we're making sure we focus on is how are we embedding all of these services, all of this development to lead to high achieving Black student outcomes. And that's what the Black Excellence Resolution is about. It's about Black children specifically having access to rigorous courses, Black children being successful academically, but also making sure we're closing that prison pipeline gap of Black students being suspended and expelled disproportionately versus all of their peers. And that's what the Black Excellence Resolution is about. And that's why this year it's very timely that we go into the development of our students, because the adults have had it. So now we need our students to get that development, our families to get that development, so they can start to see this embedded across programs. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Aaron. Really appreciate you sharing your perspective. Dr. Justin, do you mind closing this question out?
Sure. So here at Northwest, we, just like Yolanda said, we spent this past year really focusing on social justice, but now is where do you go beyond this? And so one of the main conversations that we're having on our campus right now is how can you embed diversity and inclusion work within the infrastructure of the institution? And that means embedding it within your strategic planning process. And so we're in the middle of creating a new strategic plan. And in the middle of that, it's going to have diversity and inclusion work at the forefront of it. And so we've adopted the Inclusive Excellence Framework, which says some of the same things that Dr. Aaron had mentioned, of it's not just the sole responsibility of a diversity and inclusion office to carry the load and the weight of the work. It needs to be through everybody, and every single department on our campus will have a goal and a metric towards diversity and inclusion that they have to carry out. And if they're not able to accomplish their goal, then we have to start holding them accountable for not meeting those goals. And so that's really at the forefront of what we're doing right now. We're about to get ready to start to create an inclusive excellence team that's going to look at the data, that's going to create outcomes and action items for those departments, so they're able to understand what the goal is, what the outcome is, and what the action that their particular unit can take to accomplish the said goal. So we spent this past year really just listening and trying to understand where everybody's coming from. And now, as I mentioned it in a bunch of meetings, if I leave tomorrow, or if the president of the college leaves tomorrow, there still needs to be a structure in place that's going to address diversity and inclusion work. And where is that? And that needs to be within our strategic plan. So now it's going from this just being one-off work to more institutional driven work.
Great, thanks, Dr. Justin. And it sounds like the panelists weighed in, and it sounds like having a data approach is really what's going to help drive the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, especially in higher ed. So let's look at our next question. When it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion education for students, faculty, and staff, what strategies have you found most effective? John, would love to hear your insight on this topic.
You know, there's a few things I mentioned earlier. One of the things that we have genuinely found in regards to this question, I'm just going to go back and look at to make sure I answer it correctly. Faculty, staff, strategies. Yeah. So one of the things that we have found most effective is literally just spending time. And the question becomes like, well, with everything we got going on in the multiple meetings, how do you best utilize faculty time? Is it during a faculty and staff in service, right? Do you just continue to provide all these different professional development opportunities? And something that I piloted this academic semester, even in the midst of COVID, is that we still have some academic programs that, you know, could not transition to online. It's very hard to weld virtually, so to speak, right? And so one of the things I wanted to pilot was just popping into the classrooms and seeing how they think, how they learn, how they teach, and then ask like, hey, can I have 5 minutes to introduce myself? And then from there, it's kind of become a standing every other Friday thing that John Harper is going to pop into these academic programs, and he's going to lend his area of expertise as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusions. One of the things that we've been able to do is actually partner with our Associate Vice President of Effective Teaching and Learning. And it's been a wonderful partnership to really examine what are the educational outcomes of our students. Minnesota's kind of been at the forefront nationally of some social justice type things, right? And so what we've done as a state of Minnesota is that our system colleges and universities, a bunch of us got together in smaller groups and then got together in a large group, and we're finally re-examining our policies and processes. So for me personally, the most effective strategies is to put in that extra work, right? Is to, you want to see a change, you have to make that time to understand who you're talking to, where are they at in their DEI lens and DEI journey, and then customize a plan that's going to get them to where the college needs to be, and ideally speaking, where they need to be, not just for themselves and not just for their students, but for their immediate sphere of influence too, right? Their friends and families. And so if you can go in with a plan, understanding what a person's context is as it relates to their teaching, academic advising, student affairs type things like that, and then develop an individual education plan, so to speak, we have found that to be very, very successful here at the college.
Great, thanks, John. Dr. Aaron, would you like to chime in?
Yes, John, you hit it right on the head. That's exactly how we started out. First thing we do is we look at the data, And the data is not just only academic data and cultural data, but we look at the feedback from our staff, our students, and our families. And we take that data and we look at it by, so we have 15 schools and we have the home office. So we look at that data by every single individual school plus the home office data. And we start to figure out themes. And from that, that is how we start to support our individual schools where they are and our staff where they are. And we do start to mandate some things. One of the things that we found is that giving people the option of engaging is the epitome of privilege. People with a lot of privilege who don't have to have these conversations and engage will always opt out. So we don't allow opt-outs. What happens is we have mandated one professional development per campus every single trimester. In addition to that, schools can do whatever else they want to do. That's our strategic architect model. And each one of those sessions, we have a menu of options that people can use. So there are a bunch of research and theory frameworks that we recommend they use, and that in my office and the school directors and our leadership teams have the option of actually pushing back. And an example of that is not doing fads. Earlier in the year, we had several places that wanted to dive into anti-racist work. And I pushed back quickly. I'm like, why are you doing anti-racist work when your campus has not gone through the identity work yet? You haven't even touched cultural responsiveness yet. You can't have people start to dismantle structures if they're not willing to dismantle the structures that exist in their own ideology and beliefs and within their own community, which goes back to John's point about the professional as well as the personal work. See, we can give you the professional work, but what are you willing to do personally when you leave our schools and when you leave our children and when we leave our colleagues and you're having the conversations at the dinner table with grandpappy who's 90 years old, with uncle whoever, aunt whoever who's 60 years old, with your neighbors who are making comments about the LGBTQIA person who lives across the street. So it's one thing to engage professionally, but it's a whole other thing to engage personally. So what we do is we also provide resources. Like here's a cadre of resources, and we have an actual webpage and hub that all staff can go to. And in that hub are recorded professional developments that we've done across campuses and even at the home office that schools can use and turnkey. So the way we do our development, we make them in such a way that they're turnkeyable. We use a general frame of questions for dyad conversations, which is conversations between two people, uses Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversations model. So everyone has been developing that. So every single school, they engage in those dyad conversations and small group conversations to allow people to speak in their moment. And then lastly, my office provides individual coaching as well. So when we have schools that might be struggling just a bit, we may meet with individual school leaders or groups of leadership teams or even groups of teachers and provide coaching, real-time coaching that builds on the development that they've received. So to what Justin said earlier, I don't lead all the professional development work. I just give a menu of options. Here are the resources. There's cultural responsiveness, anti-racism, trauma-informed care, multiculturalism. We provide frameworks. And then the principal and the schools can determine what trajectory they want to follow. They get feedback from us. And sometimes we push back and say, that's not the place you need to go. You need to focus here. But it's still up to them to whether they want to do that or not, because sometimes schools will say, no, we're going to take the risk. And we had 3 schools take the risk and jump into anti-racism in August. It did not go well. But that's okay, because they fell forward. They went back, they repeated some things, and then repeated the same PD 3 months later, and they went well. So we're just strategic architect, do what you do. This is what's mandated. These are the resources, but make sure we're holding people accountable to that personal development, because that's going to be very key.
Great, thanks, Dr. Aaron. Dr. Justin, your thoughts?
Yeah, so to even echo some of the things that Aaron and John said, but the other thing that we did, I basically went on a campus-wide circuit, as I call it, because if I just offered workshops to say, hey, let's have a conversation about implicit bias, or hey, let's have a conversation about microaggressions, the people that are going to come in the room are the typical people that are going to come in the room, and we're not going to reach the ones that should be in the room listening to the conversation. So I went department by department and said, hey, we're going to have this conversation. We're going to have this dialogue. And then I offered those same supplemental trainings for people who wanted to come in and get more information and more knowledge on the topic. And then we just started offering other things, because the one thing, especially being on a predominantly white campus, you got to help lead your white faculty and staff in the direction that they need to go. But you have to also let them learn at the pace that they want to learn at. So we offered book clubs. And we said, okay, we're going to read these books and we're going to have discussions. And a lot of people, just like Aaron said, a lot of people wanted to start out by saying, oh, well, I want to read How to Be Anti-Racist, and I want to read White Fragility, and let's have a discussion on that. No, you're not quite ready for that yet. So we're going to start at a base foundational level, and we're going to say, oh, the first book we're going to read here on this campus is So You Want to Talk About Race? Something that's a little bit easier. Then we're going to go to Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Now, okay, so now you understand identity development and some different concepts with it. Now, let's go have a conversation about white fragility. But we have to get you there. A lot of people, they said, well, we want to run. Well, the problem is you've always been running, and that's why you haven't acquired the knowledge. So we ain't gonna run. The strategy is we're gonna treat this as a marathon and not a sprint, and we're gonna take our time to make sure you truly understand these experiences. So the main strategy for me at this institution has been put myself out there in front, let me see every single person, and then offer some additional opportunities to allow you to grow and learn at your own pace.
Great, thanks, Dr. Justin. That was some really good insight. Yolanda, same question for you. So, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion education for students, faculty, and staff, what have you found most effective?
And I echo my fellow panelists. I'm pretty much doing the same thing what Justin just said. I'm kind of sneaking into the division meetings. I'm being put on the agenda, and that's where I start as far as being authentic. That's how you have to start these conversations. And I try to be real careful with these conversations, because a lot of the faculty, they've been at the institution, let's say 30, 40 years. I mean, this is new grounds for them, even to talk about. So again, I kind of open the floor. We talk about basic things. How did you grow up? Did you ever, experience racism? Tell me about what you feel about white privilege. I mean, I really put it out there, and not only do I facilitate it, but I also tell my own story. And I think that really helped. People really appreciate that. And that's what I'm all about. Let's take off our masks and just have the conversations. And I think that's what opens the door, because at the end of the meeting is, I have faculty come back and say, thank you for that, Yolanda. I never had that conversation before. And then they tell their colleagues to come to the meeting so we can continue these conversations. Again, I'm really doing it grassroots, I want to say. You just have to be face-to-face with folks, and it really helps having the conversation. And just to give an example, I mean, I had one white faculty member that said, I always say that, I don't see color. Well, that's a conversation I had to stop, and we had to have that in-depth conversation, because I said, if you don't see color, you don't see me, or you don't respect me. So after all these years, she said, I've been thinking that I'm saying something good, and I was offending people. And I said, yes, but you have to take this as a teachable moment. You have to, people just don't know sometimes. And that's why we're here to educate. So again, it's really breaking down the barriers, breaking down the doors to have that conversation. And I say the same thing for students. I mean, right now, students want to talk. They want to talk about what's going on nationally. They want to vent their feelings, their emotions. And we've been having like weekly meetings for our students just to come and have that conversation. But I think it's really important to always share resources with students. So we all, I always give out my name, come by and see me, see me when I get back on campus, but, call me. And again, it's really important to provide our students with resources at this time, and just have a place, a virtual space to talk. So that's been my number one right now, is just talking to our faculty, staff, and students.
Great, thanks, Yolanda. And it sounds like being able to have these conversations head on is really the starting point, and then being able to fail fast and kind of course correct if necessary. The next question in particular, I'm interested in hearing your perspective from the group. I'd love to start with you, Dr. Aaron. how can we improve the relationship to develop a symbiotic bond where we thrive off of work together that promotes both our well-being trajectories and ultimately the scholarship and practice reforms in higher ed and the P12 spaces?
I believe that goes back to what everyone's talking about, the panelists. Like everything we're talking about, and I'm hoping that people listening are hearing a common theme here. And that is the work extends beyond us. The work is inclusive of multiple people across multiple departments. So what happens is as we start to get on the agenda, like I like to say in my main work, put me on the program. And I'll literally say, Pastor, put me on the program. Just give me 20 minutes, give me 10 minutes to speak to where your department fits into the equity vision, but more importantly, how the equity vision fits into your department. So we do it from that perspective. Like, what do I need to do to support you? How do I support you? What frameworks do you need from a financial standpoint, from an educational tech standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, from a communication standpoint, from a grant writing standpoint? What do you need? And then we come together and we literally partner on a vision with that department and we bring in that scholarship. My work as a P12 practitioner and scholar is that I like to engage in conversations like this. And I like to work with my higher ed counterparts in Race Mentoring. It's a Facebook social media group. And I have conversations with them about new research and ways to embed practitioner voices in the scholarship. So a lot of times when I'm meeting with these groups of people in DSST, I'll say, hey, we should present this at a conference. Like we just presented yesterday at a social worker conference where two of our social workers and our manager of mental health presented on social worker practice in DSST. How do we in the field do the social work practice from a mental health perspective, from a wellness perspective for staff and students? And the way you do that is start to open the door and engage people. Like as practitioners, right, the four of us here, we don't wait. Because what I'm hearing from them is none of this is reactive. All of this is very proactive and strategic and intentional. We're not waiting for you to open the door. We're going to take the hinges off the door and we're going to open it and say, oh, by the way, I need to be on the program. And not at the last bullet either, not the last 5 minutes before we do our norming. How do we do on our norms today? No, I need to be at the beginning of your meeting or in the middle of your meeting. Don't put me at the end the last 10 minutes and then we run out of time and you got to move me. No, you're going to put me right here, and you're going to prioritize what we're doing. And that's how we engage multiple groups in that work. And I know I'm speaking for me, but I'm hearing the same thing across my colleagues here. That's how we engage people, and that's how we start to empower people to use their voice as scholars to speak to what they're doing in their experiences.
Great, thanks, Dr. Aaron. Would any of the other panelists like to chime in?
Sure. I'm going to echo what Aaron said, and I'm going to even take it a step farther. You know, here in Maryville, Missouri, it's a very small rural town. And so as we develop that partnership between K-12 and higher ed, one of the things that I do is I go into the school district. I go into the school district and I offer those professional development. What I've asked the superintendent is, give me 2 professional development days, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those 2 professional development days where I can go in because I know that I'm the subject area expert in the community on issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And because I'm that subject area expert and I know the school district doesn't have that, what I've charged myself with is building that relationship within the whole community and not just the university, because I'm looking at it as a very symbiotic relationship. If I can go into the school district and talk about diversity and inclusion and developing that inclusive environment, and I have Black and brown students on campus that want to be teachers, well, I can build that relationship. And now that school district is ready to embrace those Black and brown students coming in and student teaching and being a part of the environment and doing that. So I'm willing to offer myself up as that subject area expert, but also it has a personal, because we talked about the personal piece of it, right? And the personal piece of it is I'm a dad. And I got 2 Black kids in the school district in a predominantly white environment. I don't want my kids to be uncomfortable in the school district. So I'm going to put myself out there to make sure that I'm doing the things that are necessary, not only as a professional, but as a father and a professional who does this every single day, to make sure that our school district feels comfortable having those conversations and dialogues related to diversity and inclusion.
Great, thanks, Dr. Justin. Yolanda or John, any thoughts?
I could jump in. I actually been thinking a lot about this because, in my work, I'm always, am I doing enough, right? And finally I said, it does take a village to do this work. When years ago, I've been in this work for so many years. Before it was only me, holding that baton. Now I just want to not pass it, but light other batons to do this work. But I know that what's been lacking on my end is better communication or partnership with K through 12. I mean, because when we talk about K through 12, where I am, it's more about getting students, recruiting students. Now, before the pandemic, we were almost 50% students of color. And again, we just focus on recruiting, right? Recruiting and retention. And now I'm thinking about, no, we need to go into the schools and talk to the teachers, meet with them, look at the curriculum, right? We need more books in the classroom, even in kindergarten. The students need to see themselves. So I think as far as what Justin was saying, that's great, talking to the superintendent. And, it's one of those things, I'm not perfect, and I have that on my agenda, and hopefully I'm going to put that in a strategic plan to really get out. And so it's so important to partner with our K through 12 schools, because I feel as though our students should not be shocked when they get to college about hearing about DEI. So it shouldn't be the first time they're going to hear about this. So we really definitely have to get to, K through 12, and it's really our job in higher ed to really make those partnerships. I just feel sometimes the teachers and let's say faculty, or administrators, we're not really coming together, and all we're talking about is how we could be a feeder for students to come over when we have to do more work in that area. So I do admit that more work needs to be done on our end, on my end, to really partner more with K through 12.
Great, thanks, Yolanda, and thank you everyone for providing some insight. This next question, I'd love for the group to chime in. Let's start with you, John. What approach are you and your executive team taking to incorporate an inclusive staff of color?
So this is always a fun one for me because I live in Minnesota, and oftentimes, whether I'm in the South or on the West Coast or visiting a lot of different friends and family members in Baltimore, the first thing they always say is, oh, there's Black folks in Minnesota, right? As if we're not spread out enough. Specifically in Southern Minnesota, it is a very rural area. It's a very rural area, and my college just happens to have an African-American president. Our vice president of research and institutional effectiveness happens to be an African-American man. You have myself on the executive team, an African-American man, and we just lost our vice president of academic and student affairs to not Rochester Community College, Monroe Community College. So if any of our guests are out here from Monroe Community College in Rochester, New York, you got a great individual as your president now. One of the things that we've decided to do as a leadership team is one, lead by example, right? As an African-American woman anywhere in the state of Minnesota, but specifically Southern Minnesota, that's something rare that you would find, right? And so her philosophy was not just, oh, we should have a leadership team that, is diverse, but the best way to go about being the change that we also desperately need and want to see, we have to embed that in every aspect of what we do. So all of us on our executive team, or as we call it, the president's cabinet, yes, have our areas of expertise, but we're always reviewing each other's work. And so for me, I'm looking at everybody's stuff through a equity lens, a cultural competency lens, an inclusive lens, a diversity lens. Like we're doing that through research, we're doing that through finance and HR. And what we've been able to do is develop equity agents, so to speak, or equity mentors and or equity voices who work diligently and close with me. We just spent the last 9 months going through, I don't know how many exercises and trainings and challenging each other on our inclusivity lenses and on our equity lenses, on our diversity lenses. And from there, we have, quote unquote, infiltrated different aspects of the college, different committees, different things within academic affairs, right? And then shared governance and all this other things. And so, God, there's just so much to talk about. It's kind of a loaded question. And so the approach, getting back to the actual root of the question that we've taken to incorporate staff of color is twofold. One, we recognize that, there's a limited number of us that are administrators and student affairs professionals and just working staff. And so at first, our first thought was, we'll just lean heavily on them, give them the support that they need, and then they'll go and do the work for us. And no, we kind of put a stop to that because it can be very exhausting and you can catch racial battle fatigue at any given moment in time. So what we did was, instead of leaning on them, we got their peers and their counterparts, right, to go through a lot of the different trainings and different things that we did and develop their equity lenses so they can go to the peers that are of similar fashion like them, right? They can help have those courageous conversations and they can challenge the status quo and they can look at their policies and then they can look at their curriculums and then lean on our BIPOC staff for wisdom and insight, and content areas of expertise. And so it's kind of been a holistic approach. We've done a lot of stuff in the areas of dismantling some of the systematic things, right? I have one hand in student affairs, one hand in academic affairs. And so with student affairs, it was, hey, these are the policies that we're thinking about. Can you look them over? Okay, great. I bring in our other staff of color, because just because I'm an African-American man doesn't mean I have all the answers. I want to bring in our Latinx community. I want to bring in our indigenous community. For those of you that may not be aware, Minnesota is home to a lot of indigenous and tribal individuals. I want them looking at this from their lens, right? What does our Asiatic Pacific community have to say about this? And that can include our Filipino community. It's like, hey, we have a ton of international students. This is going to be a student policy. We need student input. Well, let me go talk to our students from Nepal, right? Let me go talk to our students from Saudi Arabia. Let me go talk to our students from East Africa and then West Africa. And so what we do is we've gotten so much better about communication. And so how do we get faculty and staff involved and incorporate in the process? We gently nudge, so to speak, because we want people to have a voice, but we make sure that we frame it in a way that it lets them know that your voice is not only important, it matters. Because going forward, there's no more room for, oh, well, I don't really feel that way. You got to take the feelings out of it. It's about student success. And at the end of the day, if your goal, whether it's K through 12 or higher education or in any of your businesses, if it's not about the success of your students, the success of your employees, so to speak, and overall success and the health and wellness as it relates to DEI initiatives, then I think you got the goal and the values and the missions backward.
Thanks, John. Yolanda, what are your thoughts on the approach that you and your executive team take to incorporate an inclusive staff of color?
Well, right now, I have to say our faculty are not, mirroring our students, right? Our students need to see more of them in the classroom. So we are definitely this year, like I said, we're being intentional. We're even looking at our job descriptions to make sure that they're inclusive. And also I just developed a diversity statement. Basically is, we put down the statement of values of diversity, the importance of it. And if you feel you can fit into Massasoit, then we welcome you to apply. So we're really doing that as far as looking at the job postings. Also, we're always looking at our search and screen committees and policies. Last year, our DEI committee, we came out of having diversity ambassadors. What was happening is, like John was talking about, is I call it black tax. It's the black folks who always get asked to sit on these committees, and it gets tiring after a while. So we came up with folks that want to volunteer from the DEI committee to be diversity ambassadors. And they did go through, bias trainings and other workshops. And what they do is when there's a interview or the search committee comes together, they're the first ones on the list. And they are the representative on that search to make sure that it's fair and that we have a pool of qualified people of color. going through the process. So we're trying to be, again, intentional as far as having inclusive staff of color. But not only that, looking at the webpage, if you want to apply at a certain college, I want to see what this college is all about. So we have to make sure HR, we're going to have some testimonials on our page. We're going to have some great pictures of our faculty and staff on there, because we want to attract folks of color. And, we can talk about, bringing in folks of color, but you have to remember, we have to retain folks of color. So we're looking at onboarding. Right now, we have to strengthen our onboarding. And that's very important for any college company, is that in their onboarding package, you have to, list in there different ethnic restaurants, even barbershops, even where the spouses, wife, they may get their hair done. So you have to really be, not only just recruiting, just to recruit, but you also want to work on how are they going to be retained and happy where they are. So those are the type of things that we're thinking, like outside of the box, as far as, again, I think onboarding is very important, because most of the time it's like, oh, here's your union packet, or here's your salary stuff. And you're not really talking about the neighborhood that you're living in. So we're just doing like things like that. But right now, our overhaul is the job postings, and being intentional with our diversity statement within that job posting.
Great, thanks everyone. We're now going to transition to our Q&A portion of the event. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A chat, and we'll get to answer as many as these questions as we have time for. Dr. Aaron, I'll toss it over to you. So the first question is, how do you handle interracial issues such as colorism and class that can cause a breakdown in the community?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and a very profound question, because I just read an article yesterday on how we unintentionally, what is the title? How we unintentionally make certain groups invisible in our DEI initiatives, because it's not a descriptor of that group, such as mental health, neurodiversity, multiracial, things like that. So, and I can answer this by also responding to the last question as well. And I love that the question was about inclusion and not diversity, because diversity and inclusion are two different things. So the way you address that interracial issue is when you're looking at everything from not just an inclusionary lens, but an intersectional lens. So when we're having, like, some of our development we have started to do with our leadership team is around asking specific questions before, during, and after the decision-making process. And that question is, who is not in the room? Who is not here? Before we even get started, who is not here? And not just racially. We're talking about ethnically, we're talking about sexually, we're talking about gender, we're talking about non-binary, we're talking about new versus veteran. Who is not in the room? Because research will show that when you look at executive leadership teams or any leadership team, staff of color and LGBTQIA staff are usually the people with the least amount of experience. And we get left in the margins because people assume we don't know what we're talking about, but we're bringing a different lens that may not be in the room. So to address that colorism and address that classism, you've got to ask those tough questions. Who's not in the room? Who are we not considering? And here's a real hard one. As a result of this decision, who is most likely going to be impacted negatively? And if they're going to be impacted negatively, why aren't they in the decision-making process? And we need to pause until that group comes in here and tells us what the impact is going to be and what we can do to mitigate that impact. Even if it means the deadline is Friday and we have to extend it 30 more days. See, the issue with inclusivity is what happens is we are so focused on getting to the objective and the outcome that we don't pause to allow multiple groups in the community to give us that real feedback and make us maybe pivot, because we're focused on the outcome. We're not focused on the journey. So that's one of the ways we're doing that. We're literally developing our leaders to pause, have the conversation, have your one-off conversations, come to the group and bring that perspective and do not water it down. That means you may have to bring a coordinator into the room with the chief and have the coordinator tell you why this is a problem and give them that platform. And the chiefs have to remain silent and hear what that person's saying and not interrupt. So we're training our leadership team to engage in conversations like that and to decenter themselves. And that's the key word, decenter. Once you decenter, you start to bring the community together, and those folks who are dealing with colorism and dealing with all this classism will start to be incorporated into the conversation.
Dr. Griffen, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Wanted to share like a brief story to everything that you're saying. I was working with a certain academic program here at the college. We set up the meeting. And so then I walked in the meeting and then I looked around and I said, hey, before we get started, who all got the calendar invite? And so everybody that was in there raised their hand. And so I said, well, what about this person, and this person? And everybody was like, oh, we told them they don't need to be here. And I said, this is a great starting point, because what had happened is that the three individuals they told didn't need to be there happened to be rural white men. And I personally had a problem with that because we live in a rural community. And I had to explain to that group of people before we get started, I'm going to go to their offices and get them because they bring a perspective. And so it went into this, well, they dominate conversations and all those other things. And I was like, what you're saying is why we're here. I said, you just displayed a level of classism about how you feel about your colleagues and peers, not just because they're men within a non-traditional academic field that men typically don't go into. That's a problem. And so in all that we do, we have to be intentional because that breaks down a community. I didn't realize, and it took me, I think, 2 years in my little over 5 years that I've been with the college to realize that while there are 5 colleges and universities in this southern Minnesota area that I currently live in, there's a big difference between the rural farm individuals that have come along and grow and different things versus how people at the colleges and universities think and operate. And if you don't have all of the voices in the room, you're not going to be able to accomplish that goal.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Aaron and John, for weighing in and sharing your perspective. The next question we're going to address, and I'll throw it out to the panelists. How do you reduce the elitism and the scholarly angle that most DEI trainings or practices seem to embrace?
So I'll start this one out. And my response to this is you have to base it off of the audience that you're speaking with if you want to reduce the elitism or the scholarly aspect of it. Because on a college campus, if you don't have the scholarly approach and you just approach it from your personal lived experience, what those people in the room are going to say is you're an N of one. You're a person of one. You're one experience, one example, one perspective, and it's going to go in one ear and out the other. But if I'm able to, and this is the same thing that I tell my staff here at work, when we're presenting to faculty and staff, if I'm able to combine my lived experience with scholarly pieces, that makes that work that much more stronger. It makes it that much more impactful. And then that group is going to listen to it. That group of faculty and staff, they're going to buy in and really understand what you're saying. Now, when I'm talking to students, way different. Those students don't care about the scholarly piece. They don't care about what Beverly Tatum wrote. They don't care about what Robin DiAngelo is writing. What they want to know is, hey, how did your lived experience play a role into these experiences that we're seeing play out nationally, locally, et cetera? And so you have to pick and choose when you want to use that scholarly angle. I know a lot of people may not like to use the scholarly angle, but if you're trying to make an impact in this work, you got to pick and choose. If you're not trying to make an impact in this work and you just want to go in the room and complain about everything that's wrong and every inequity that's there, then you just walk in there and you just forget about all that other stuff. But if you're going to walk in the room of professionals and you want them to buy into what you're saying and what you're presenting based off of the population, you need that scholarly angle.
Any of our other panelists like to weigh in on this question?
I could jump in. I agree with what Justin is saying. And when you talk about trainings, what I've learned is that I don't do the trainings anymore. I try to, they don't want to hear Yolanda, right? Sometimes you get an eye roll or something. I'm done with all that. My best strategy has been to get other faculty from other colleges and universities that do this work and to come in and talk to their fellow faculty members. And sometimes you have to be strategic. Sometimes, you know, again, you got to look at your audience. If it's going to be majority white, I'm going to bring in that white ally from another college or university and kind of tell it like it is. And that's another thing too. I try to get trainers or workshop facilitators that say it like that. They don't shy away. And yet very interesting, you know, so that's been a strategy. Again, I kind of hung up my hat on no more, you know, doing the presenting, but I like to bring in other counterparts. That way it connects with other faculty members, and that's what works, because then they have a good dialogue. And sometimes now I don't even stay in the room. I feel as though when I'm in the room, people clam up. They don't want to say how they really feel or want to talk about anything, because to them, Yolanda's administration, right? So I say, you know what, I'll leave the room. And so that way honest conversations can happen. So that's been effective, is just bringing in other scholarly folks to come in and relate to fellow faculty members.
The only thing I wanted to add to that is you take the elitism of the scholarship out once you align it to practice, as both Justin and Yolanda said. So when I'm meeting with school directors and we're using a DEI development and I'm using research, I'm basing it on leader development and how they practice as leaders using this framework. When I'm meeting with teachers, I'm going into the classroom and I'm talking about what cultural responsiveness or critical race theory or whatever looks like in the classroom. And I give them exemplars from the classroom. That takes the elitism out. And as I said earlier, I don't do fads. So I'm not big in going with who's popular right now. Like last year, Zaretta Hammons, and people were like, well, aren't you citing Zaretta Hammons? I am. But before there was Zaretta Hammons, there was Dr. Gloria Landon, and there was Dr. Geneva Gay. So that's why you see my slides talking about them. And then I use Zaretta Hammons as a practice, because this is what she said about practice. So that's how I take the elitism out. I just go straight practice, and I might have one little citation, and that's the end of it. I don't have a whole bunch of scholarly slides when I do presentations.
Great, thanks, Dr. Aaron. And in closing, I would like to give everyone a special thank you for joining us today, and a special thanks to our panelists. You can check out Halo's previous events on our YouTube channel, and we will keep you updated about our future events that we will be hosting moving forward. We will be sending surveys out early next week to get your feedback as we continue to iterate our future events. And I hope everyone has a great weekend, and thanks for joining us. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.